And why the mRNA vaccine in particular might be a problem is that there is reverse transcription from RNA into DNA and reintegration into our genome. That's one possibility, right?
So have you read that somewhere to be a certainty? Because I couldn't find
as for a possibility.
So let's just describe what reverse transcription means. So again, the arrow of the process is that the DNA codes for proteins. So if you need, say, an antibody, let's say an antibody is a protein that you want to code for, the software for that is in the DNA. That software is moved to the outside of the nucleus, which contains the genetic code, by the messenger RNA. Messenger RNA then turns it into protein using ribosomes. We won't get into that, but so that is how it works. DNA turns into mRNA. mRNA turns into proteins. Now you're saying that what can sometimes happen is that the mRNA can work backwards and reverse transcribe. So we call the transcription of DNA into mRNA, we call that process transcription, because basically the mRNA is just copying what's in the DNA and moving it out of the nucleus. That process is called transcription. Reverse transcription is when that mRNA goes back and encodes itself into the DNA. And that's what you're saying you have read that happens?
So first of all, that's how HIV works. Right. So HIV actually comes with reverse transcriptase. And so importantly, actually, in now, the trials that are happening are including a certain number of HIV patients. So that's important because their cells will have circulating reverse transcriptase. We know that. Now, separately, there's an interesting question here is, does that happen de novo? Meaning, even without HIV being involved, is there a certain amount of reverse transcription? That's an interesting question because in the body, if you just give mRNA in the cell, right, it actually has a very, very fast degradation rate, like within minutes to hours, right? And so we're not talking about days, we're talking minutes to hours. So why is it that we're getting spike proteins being generated for days from mRNA, right? And there is some, I don't know that I've come across a credible confirmation source, but there is some indication that the reason is that it's reverse transcribed into a free-floating, non-integrated piece of DNA. And then that DNA codes mRNA ongoingly in order to prolong that effect. And it's still only days. It ultimately degrades because it's sort of free-floating. It's not protected in the nucleus. Right.
So that DNA is it's in the cytosol. It's not in the nucleus.
That's my impression. But again, I was also very shaky on that. I could be completely wrong on this. If anybody can find confirmatory information on that, that'd be great.
The only thing, you mentioned HIV is reverse transcriptase as well, but the HIV virus has a whole bunch of machinery to enable that RNA to be reverse transcribed, right? And so if you just had a naked, very sort of limited amount of code, in the mRNA that you're introducing as a vaccine, you would need to have additional machinery in order to take that and then turn it into transcription, because the HIV virus comes with the apparatus, like I want this genetic code in that DNA. Right, and so this naked mRNA vaccine wouldn't have any of that genetic information at all. This adjuvant genetic information. So if you're contending that there is a risk of reverse transcriptase, then actually, yes, I see a potential huge problem, right? For all the reasons we can get into.
Yeah, but I guess actually my bigger point is different than that, right? And this is something I thought a lot about actually before we kind of sat down and how to make this point. The bigger point is that whatever objection I come up with, whatever potential disaster scenario I could spin, number one, it will be far-fetched by nature, but by definition, right? Number two, not only will it be far-fetched, it's also almost guaranteed to not be the problem that we should be concerned about. And the reason for that is the most important potential side effect is the one we don't think will happen. And by don't think will happen, meaning we didn't even think about it. Like, it's not on our radar. That's the one that actually is going to be a problem. And we saw that with rotavirus, right? The original RotaShield vaccine came out, and it was nowhere on anybody's radar that this might cause intussusception. That was not even a blip on anybody's
So we should probably
mind.
get into the rotavirus, because this gets to the conversation of unforeseen side effects of vaccines, right? So the rotavirus was a virus made for children against what was the name of the virus?
Rotavirus.
It's the rotavirus itself.
Yeah.
And so the rotavirus causes a severe diarrhea in kids in third world countries. This is actually quite
everywhere. It's in the U.S. as well. I mean, it causes pre-vaccine, right? Caused hundreds of thousands of cases of It was endemic. Basically, everybody by age 5 had it.
No, I was going to say death. It causes actual death in third world countries where there's poor access to resources.
I see. Sorry, I didn't let you finish.
Drinking water is an issue. It actually causes a lot of kids to die. So it was an important vaccine to be created.
Almost 500,000 a year, actually.
Died.
So,
right? Yeah. And so it was a huge source. I mean, all it is diarrhea. That's all it is. It's severe diarrhea.
And we see that because it was 40 to 60 in the U.S. Right, compared to 500,000 globally. And the reason is that in the U.S. we have great resources. And it's just IV fluids.
Exactly.
At the end of the day, you come in, the kid's almost half dead, whatever. You put a central line in, and you do whatever, and then you whatever you have to do.
Whereas in third world countries, even that little amount of just giving IV fluids is an issue. Although they've used ORS.
Mom's going to carry the child for 20 miles to walk to the nearest city, right?
So the rotavirus is a very important virus that was created, and I think what was the first iteration of
the rotavirus vaccine was created.
The vaccine was
there are enough conspiracy theories out there. We want to say the virus is created.
Right? It was one of the an important vaccine to be created, and then it ended up causing a relatively rare, quite rare side effect called intussusception, where the small intestine kind of telescopes in itself and just kind of gets stuck.
Correct.
And because it telescopes and gets stuck that way, it's essentially an obstruction of the bowel.
Obstruction, and also can cause ischemia, right? Because it's folding on its own blood supply as well.
Potentially quite devastating, side effect. So what was the rate of intussusception in that?
Somewhere between 1 in 10,000 and 1 in 30,000.
Yeah.
Right. And the original study that led to FDA approval of the first rotavirus vaccine, which was called RotaShield. The original study had 15,000 participants, 10,000 I think in the trial and 5,000 placebo or something like that. So it wasn't an even split.
So this is an excellent example of how a serious side effect like intussusception, which requires a surgeon a lot of the times to resolve, if the frequency of such a serious side effect is as low as 1 in 30,000, let's say, a study that involves 20,000 people is probably not going to capture that, right? And
even if it does, you can't tell from whether it's chance.
It was chance or not, yeah. So you would have to give it to 200, 400,000 people, 1 million people before, there's a higher case of this intussusception thing, and then you work out why it happened. There's a pathophysiology. We won't get into that, why intussusception is occurring.
No, but that's actually important. On some, not the exact pathophysiology, that's not important, but what is important is this idea of what we understand looking back versus what we understand looking forward. And this is kind of the Taleb black swan idea, right? So the 3 elements of a black swan event is that, number 1, it has a huge impact, right? Number 2, it was completely unforeseen. And number 3, interestingly, he includes as a criterion that it is explained after the fact.
Sure.
Right? Mm-hmm. And the market crashes are like that. It's we should have known because of the housing bubble. Nobody knew ahead of time. Nobody thought that was going to happen, right? Same with rotavirus, right? We did a study in 15,000 people, looked great, very effective. Nobody thought that was going to happen, right? And after the fact, you can say, oh, yes, now it makes sense because it can cause some lymphoproliferative swelling because, of course, you're triggering the immune system in the gut. And because of that swelling, that can be a source for intussusception, right? But that's an after the fact understanding. And that's the key difference, is that after the fact, we can make ourselves feel better by telling ourselves, oh, we understand why that happened, right? But when you're looking forward, no one expected that.
So the point is that you can have side effects that are unforeseen at the onset, side effects that you wouldn't even think of, like this would happen. And then later on, you can make a story of, it was obvious why it happened. And then that is the case, that was the case in the rotavirus. And that could be the case, to bring it back to this mRNA vaccine, that could be the case in the mRNA vaccine, right? And this is something that, or any vaccine.
Any vaccine. That's the bigger point.
Well, perhaps more so for the mRNA vaccine because it's a completely new platform, right?
Correct.
So we haven't ever had experience with the mRNA, at least with the live attenuated vaccine or sort of the replication deficient adenoviruses, which is the other platform. You have some experience, right? Oh, we used to give this, attenuated virus with, say, the polio vaccine. And so 1 in 2.5 million cases, you will actually get polio. So maybe there's an actual chance you got coronavirus. In this case, we don't have any narratives to go on. We don't have anything like, well, in the past mRNA vaccines, these kind of things happen. We don't have any of that kind of narratives as all to go on. And, I want to make sure that we don't come across as alarmists, right? We're not saying this is where we both, I think, even before this discussion, agreed that whatever concerns we start raising, I
agree with you on anything.
Whatever concerns we begin to raise are open for gross misinterpretation because there's a lot of nuance there, right? So just to piggyback on this rotavirus example, 1 in 30,000 people got a serious side effect, which led to the discontinuation of the vaccine, right?
Correct.
Now, 1 in 30,000, is that a high number or is that a low number? And to some extent, that is subjective, right? It depends on the side effect, first of all, but it also depends on what is let's, for example, say, actually, this is a good launching off point. We have the mRNA vaccine, we deploy it, right? And 4 months later, we've given it to 10 million people. And we find, just like the rotavirus, there's a 1 in 30,000 chance of you getting X, whatever that is, right? Then the next question is, okay, are you going to discontinue it?
Right.
Is 1 in 30,000 an acceptable risk profile for that X, right? And then the question has to be, what is that X? Does your brain explode, your eyes pop out of your head 1 in 30,000 times?
Right.
Or do you get diarrhea for a week and maybe you're hospitalized, but you get better, right? And so so 2 points here. The question of whether to discontinue it, if it's 1 in 30,000, whatever, is first of all, we don't even know what the X is. Like it's a new platform. That X could be any. Your skin turns green permanently, right? And you glow in the dark forever, right? And that is like 1 in 30,000 people are just going to be glowing in the dark from now on. And that is the legacy of the mRNA vaccine.